He kōna I purangi tēnei nā te reo irirangi o Aotearoa.
1,000 feet above sea level.
Rotorua, it's world famous since ages ago.
Focal point of this 3,000 square mile region of the North Island is the attractive progressive town of Rotorua.
There's mud pools, geysers, hangi and haka concerts. But the name Rotorua is part of a longer name with a story. As local Kingi Biddle explains, it's a story that has to do with an ancestor named Ihenga. Now, during his travels, he comes across a small lake. In te reo Māori, roto is lake and itsi means small.
So, nobody was there. It was only him and his, Ihenga and his kuri. He said,
dog.
Nei, te rotu iti Ihenga. I ariki ai a kahu.
So, in short, the very practical Ihenga sees a small lake and calls it, well, Ihenga's small lake, Rotoiti, and he dedicates it to his father-in-law, Kahumatamomoe. But then, I know, it gets better. He comes across another lake, except it's much bigger.
And then he came to Rotorua and he specifically used the word nui.
Nui to mean big, except, I know what you're thinking, there's no nui in Rotorua. Well, that's in the longer version of the name, a name not many people know, like Mati, a tourist who I bumped into at Kuido Park.
Known about Rotorua and the thermal area, geysers, etc. for quite a long time, yeah.
And have you any idea what the long name is to this place?
No, I don't.
We'll explore the story and find out about how it's pronounced.
Probably for the first 20, 25 years of my life, I lived in Rotorua.
And why did you say it like that?
Oh, because that's how he said it. Growing up, it was Rotorua.
I'm heading to this thermal wonderland to get the skinny on the name Rotorua. This is Nau Mai Town, a podcast about Aotearoa place names, called Justine Murray Aho. Rangitihi Pene has links to the local iwi, Ngāti Whakauwe, Ngāti Tarawhai and Tūhaurangi. We met up at his workplace, Rotorua Library.
I, very brief periods, try and pretend I'm a librarian, but mainly I work as a mātanga Māori for them and do iwi engagement.
So while the name is Rotorua, to others Rotorua, the longer name is actually
Te Rotorua nui a Kahumatamomoe.
In case you missed that.
Te Rotorua nui a Kahumatamomoe, named after an ancestor known as Kahumatamomoe, who initially lived on the coast at Maketu. And he's one of the sons of the captain of the Tarawa canoe, Tamata Kapua. He's more or less our main ancestor, whakapapa-wise, in Rotorua. So Rotorua was actually named by his son-in-law, Ihenga, also a nephew of his, who, well, I would say, conquered Rotorua by renaming it.
Renaming it. So before it was Te Rotorua nui a Kahumatamomoe, it actually had another name.
Ngā wai karekare o Marupunganui, the rippling waters of Marupunganui, ngā wai karekare o Marupunganui. So Marupunganui came across on the Tarawa canoe. He, along with others, shifted and lived in Rotorua.
So Rotorua, potentially, could have been called Nā Wai Karekare o Marupunganui. But Ihenga had other plans.
Ihenga tricked him into believing that he had been there longer by antiquating a altar, a tuahu. He burnt it to make it look like it was older. And so that proved that he'd been there longer, even though...
So it was like a stake in the ground
yes,
kind of
thing? Yes, it was. A stake in the ground, a sacred stake. And so Marupunganui, not being able to disprove the claim of Ihenga, then essentially shifted his people onto Makoe Island, which he named Te Motu Tapua Tiniro, this, after a Hawaii name, Sacred Isle of Tiniro, way back in Hawaii times.
So Maru Punganui was the first person to name this place. Today we call it Rotorua. So he deserves, of course, some credit. And I think it's important to remember that we're talking about a time where land was being named left, right and centre. It was a way to enforce mana whenua, or authority. Ihenga himself is known as the name giver. Not happy with Nau Mai Karekare or Maru Punganui, he bestowed another name.
Te Rotorua nui a Kahumatamomoe, the great second lake that was named after Kahumatamomoe. So even though there are people there, he was essentially the conqueror retelling the history.
So 2 lakes, the first, Rotoiti and Rotorua, named by Ihenga, both dedicated and named after his wife, Hene Te Kākara, her father and his uncle, Kahumatamomoe. So who was he?
Kahumatamomoe, I would say, is our main trunk for the main tribes known as Ngāpu Manawa e Waru o Aotearoa.
The 8 beating hearts.
8 beating hearts.
And the 8 children represent the 8.
And the 8 children represent the 8 hearts of Te Aroa Ngāpu Manawa e Waru. So it all goes back to Tamata Kapua and his son Kahumatamomoe.
So an intrepid journey is behind the name Rotorua. I wondered if the people coming to admire the place knew this. So I hung out for a bit. Yep, sounds kind of creepy, at Quido Park, known for its geothermal pools, and I bumped into Marty and Joe.
We live in Denmark in Western Australia, which is on the south coast. Beautiful part of the world, yep. I was 19 when I first come to New Zealand, and I knew about Rotorua way back then. I didn't visit here. I wish I had have back then, but I've known about Rotorua and the thermal area, geysers, etc. for quite a long time, yeah.
And have you any idea what the long name is to this place?
No, I don't.
Te Rotorua nui a Kahumatamomoe, named after an ancestor.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting, yeah, that's good to know. It's quite an interesting place, yeah, for sure.
Yep, it's an interesting place. This is where I was born. Dad worked on the power lines and we lived here for about 11 years during the 80s and 90s. As a college student, me and my mates would call it Rotorua, complete with badly pronounced vowels. It's kind of ironic because we were in the bilingual unit, which meant daily te reo Māori classes with Mrs. Ray and Kapahaka. My partner's family is from the local iwi Tūhaurangi Ngāti Wāhiao at Whakarewarewa in Rotorua. So I asked him, his name's Regan, about the pronunciation.
You knew it was Rotorua, but it was easier to say Rotorua, only because everyone else was saying it and that's what you heard. So why would you want to be anyone different and say, oh, Rotorua? It's a bit more of a harder to say ro, it's easier to say Rotorua.
So rolling the R's is one thing. Then there's the nicknames for this place. There's one name in particular that's based on the bright lights of Las Vegas.
This is my guess.
Yep.
I don't know for sure, but I assume it's from all the motel lights on Fenton Street. We have a congregation of motels and hotels on Fenton Street, and they light up that strip.
For Kingi Biddle, that name leaves a bit of a bad taste.
I hate that. Roto Vegas, somebody, I did an interview once and somebody said to me, oh, how's Vegas? And I went to that person, oh, I've only been there once, because I've been to Vegas, eh? But if you want to know how Rotorua is, yeah, it's awesome.
Kingi is a former broadcaster and Toastmaster. He's pretty good at telling a yarn. He spent half of his life referring to his hometown as Rotorua, but then he learned more about the history.
The name Te Rotorua nui a Kahumatamomoe is part of my pepeha. Ko ngongo taha te maunga ko Te Rotorua nui a Kahumatamomoe te moana, no kōrero around Te Rotorua nui a Kahumatamomoe. Gifting Rotorua, naming Rotorua as a jewel for your father-in-law, for the father of the one you love. There is a story, there are connections, there are links to these are like guidelines like that, Da Vinci Code, what is the Mona Lisa really saying to me? What is the Last Supper? What is the real kōrero? What is it saying to me? Te Rotorua nui a Kahumatamomoe, what does that say to me?
Acts of love, sometimes violence or even pit stops can be told or remembered in a place name. And there are plenty of these examples in Rotorua. Here's Rangitihi Pene again.
Descriptive geographical features, like the headland, Te Koutu, and, the long hill, Pukeroa, which is the hospital hill. And then you have names that are like events. There's a beautiful bluff to the southwest of Rotorua called Horohoro, and that's short for Te Horohoroinga o ngā ringaringa o Kahumatamomoe, the place where Kahumatamomoe washed his hands. Over to the east we have a lake called Okataina, that's what we all call it. It's Te Roto I Kataina ai a Te Rangi Takaroro,
Wow.
a big chief there called Te Rangi Takaroro, son of Te Rāwhai, that's the tribe of that area. According to that, sat on a rock and laughter was laughed at.
Named after actions of
named
ancestors.
after, to commemorate some action of a chief or in honour of that chief.
So maybe start by practicing the rolling of the R's. Here's a definition courtesy of Google.
A rolled R is made by causing the tongue to vibrate on the roof of the mouth as air is forced between the tiny gap between the roof and your tongue.
Maybe you just have to try and slow it down, and get into rolling your R's so it becomes Rotorua. Roto, so we know it's a lake, and Rua too, but it's actually the second discovered lake.
And once you know the story behind the name, then maybe you can enjoy all the cool things Rotorua has to offer.
Go for a swim in the lake, go for a cocoa, go for a mineral pool, and head over to what's known as Tokorangi now, used to be the Redwoods, because we're starting to tell those stories so people can really see who we are. We're more than just plastic pew-pew people, who like to go, like that. There's depth. And when they can start to see the stories, maybe they'll go home and start to want to learn the stories of the people who call the land their home too. And then share those stories. Our koroa Don Stafford once said, the last 1,000 years of Aotearoa history is my history too. It's our history. So let's tell those stories so people know.
Ko te arawa te waka, ko te arawa te mana whenua. E mihi nei, e tau nei. Thanks for listening to Nau Mai Town, written and produced by me, Justine Murray. Executive producer Tim Watkin and Liz Garton. Engineers Phil Benge, William Saunders and Steve Burridge. Also thanks to Kingi Biddle, Rangitihi Pene and Martin Joe Anstis. Follow Nau Mai Town, that's Naumai, on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio or any good podcasting app.